blessed Savior, he's worthy to be praised. From the rising of the sun unto the going down of the same, he's worthy. Jesus is worthy. He's worthy to be praised. He is worthy. To Pastor Carter and to all of you, my brothers and sisters, how delighted I am to be here today and to be able to share in this worship experience. I tell you, I don't know what to say really, because for Pastor Carter to just keep asking me to come, I do not take it lightly. Of all the preachers that he knows, and he knows a lot of them, but he keeps asking us to come. And Pastor Carter, I want you to know I've said it privately and I say it publicly. I am just so delighted and thankful, and I do not take it lightly. I said to Pastor Carter when he first came, I said, now, because I came for EK, that does not mean that you got to have me. But he just keeps on. And I am honored at the privilege. Thank you, thank you. And certainly, you all know my relationship to Pastor Bailey and to Miss Sheila. And today I'm glad to have one of my sons in the ministry's widow. Claudia, where are you? That's Claudia Banks. Her husband was one of our sons in the ministry who passed away a few months ago. And keep her in your prayers if you can and if you will. I want to call your attention to St. Mark chapter 6, beginning at verse number 30. And if y'all will turn the lights on where I can see. Y'all got to remember now, in September, I'll be 80. I'm reading from the English Standard Version of the Bible, and the reason I'm reading from the English Standard Version is because McKissick and H.B. Charles told me I was reading Dake's Bible, and that was not the way it was supposed to be. So I'm reading from the English Standard. I'm doing what these young men say. The apostles returned to Jesus and told him all that they had done and taught. And he said to them, come away by yourselves to a desolate place and rest a while, for many were coming and going, and they had no leisure even to eat. They went away into the boat to a desolate place by themselves. Now many saw them going, and recognized them, and they ran there on foot from all the towns and got there ahead of them. When he went ashore, he saw a great crowd, and he had compassion on them because they were like sheep without a shepherd. And he began to teach them many things. And when it grew late, his disciples came to him and said, "This is a desolate place, and the hour is now late." Can you say this with me? Send them away. To go into the surrounding countryside and villages and buy themselves something to eat. But he answered them, "You give them something to eat." They said to him, "Shall we go and buy 200 penny worth of bread and give it to them to eat?" And he said to them, "How many loaves do you have? Go and see." And when they had found out, they said, 5 and 2 fish. Then he commanded them all to, can you say, sit down? In groups on the green grass. So they sat down in groups by hundreds and by 50s. And taking the 5 loaves and the 2 fish, he looked up to heaven and said a blessing and broke the loaves and gave them to the disciples to set before the people. And he divided the 2 fish among them all. And they ate and were all satisfied. And they took up 12 baskets full of broken pieces and of the fish. And those who ate the loaves were 5,000 men. I want to talk about a spread in the wilderness. Hold on to this for me. A spread in the wilderness. You may be seated. Stuart, Barton, Babage, an Anglican priest, wrote a book called The Vacuum of Unbelief. In that book, he noted that you can almost write the life of Christ based upon him being interrupted by events that were not on his daily calendar. And I found out that what he said is unequivocally true. And I want to take for a moment to show you that what he says is, in fact, the truth. In Mark chapter 1, Jesus was teaching in a synagogue in Capernaum, and he was interrupted by a man with an unclean spirit. In Mark 1, Jesus was going to Simon and Andrew's house with his disciples, James and John, for the Sabbath meal, and was interrupted by Peter's mother-in-law, who was sick with a fever. In Mark 1, Jesus was praying in a desolate place, and his praying was interrupted by some of his disciples who said, "Everybody is looking for you." In Mark chapter 2, Jesus was in whom most scholars say was Peter's house in Capernaum teaching, and he was interrupted by 4 men who tore a hole in the roof of that house and let down a paralyzed man. In Mark 3, Jesus was dealing with some scribes who said that he was possessed by Beelzebub, and he was interrupted by his mother and his brothers. In Mark 4, Jesus was tired and was asleep in the stern of a ship, and he was interrupted by his fearful, panic-stricken disciples who said, "Master, carest thou not that we perish?" In Mark chapter 5, Jesus is teaching, and while he was teaching, his teaching was interrupted by Mr. Jairus, whose daughter was gravely ill and eventually dies. In Mark chapter 5, I'm just trying to tell you he was interrupted. In Mark chapter 5, Jesus was en route to see about Mr. Jairus' interruption, and that interruption was interrupted by the woman with an issue of blood. In Matthew chapter 9, I'm just trying to tell you that. In Matthew chapter 9, after Jesus had finished dealing with the interruption and the interrupting interruption, Jesus was interrupted by 2 blind men. In Mark 7, Jesus retreats to a house and seeks to be incognito, but was interrupted by a woman who had a little daughter with an unclean spirit. In Luke chapter 23, we find the ultimate of ultimate interruptions because Jesus was dying on the cross. And while dying on the cross for our salvation, his dying was interrupted by the thief on the right, who said, "Lord, when thou comest into thy kingdom, remember me." And so, brothers and sisters, in Mark chapter 6, we come to another interrupting episode. Now, according to the Synoptic Gospel, the disciples had just returned from their test-run missionary journey where they saw God work through them in a very powerful fashion. Now, through the power of God, they had both success and victory, but the aftermath of their success was they were emotionally drained, physically weary, and spiritually spent. Jesus, knowing that if they did not come apart, they would eventually wind up coming apart. So it's at this point that Jesus commands them to enter into the purposeful ministry of disengagement. He says, "Come ye yourselves apart into a desert place." In other words, let's take a break. Now, thus they withdrew to the region on the northeastern shore of the Sea of Galilee. It was isolated, lonely, desolate, uninhabited with green grass. However, as Jesus sought to withdraw himself from an anxious crowd, the crowd beheld Jesus and the 12 get into a boat and cross the sea. They took note of his direction and surmised his destination. As a result, the crowd ran overland to meet Jesus and the 12 when they landed. Now, when Jesus disembarked, that was not to be the peaceful, needful retreat that he sought for himself and his disciple, for there was a crowd waiting on the seashore with expectancy and anticipation. Jesus' planned retreat for the 12 was interrupted by people in need. Now, when Jesus beheld the interrupting crowd who had outrun the boat, Jesus, who did not have a do not disturb sign on his person, and who was in his deity omnibenevolent and all-loving, was not annoyed by the interruption. It does not say that he expressed frustration with the crowd, but it says he was moved with compassion. And it seems here that Jesus' compassion for the shepherdless crowd overcame his personal weariness. Jesus postponed his rest and rest for the 12 in order to meet the needs of this interrupting crowd. So Mark's gospel, which is the gospel of action, we're told that he began to teach them many things. Now, all we know from Mark is he taught them many things, and it took much of the day. Now, Luke adds that he taught them the kingdom. Then Matthew says Jesus also healed the sick. And when we couple the fact that Jesus taught about the kingdom with the healing of the sick, it suggests to me that he did not want souls to go to hell with a healed body. Are you with me? Now, it's now late in the day. The Jews had two periods of evening. One period was 3 to 6, the other was 6 to 9, and it is now the first period. The interrupting crowd are now hungry because in the haste to be with Jesus, they brought no food with them. That means now we got a problem. Now, how do we meet the needs of this fast, hungry crowd? Well, we see the message of the disciples. The message of the disciples is a message of hopelessness and faithlessness. For in Mark 6:36, the disciples said to Jesus, "Send them away." Now, this message of hopelessness and faithlessness, it represents, and I want you to get this, orders that come from the bottom up. Are you with me? And we can tell orders that come from the bottom up because orders that come from the bottom up are not based upon the Lord's awesomeness and his omnipotent power, but it's based upon man's limited ability to see what God is able to do. And brothers and sisters, we wonder why the church cannot make some rapid strides. The problem could be based upon the fact that we are guilty of the Adam and Eve syndrome. We are guilty of opting to take orders from the bottom up. And brothers and sisters, orders from the bottom up seems always to be faithless, despairing, and hopeless. Well, we wonder why Abraham heeded the advice of Sarah and had a son by Hagar. He took orders from the bottom up. We wonder why Jacob, he took years to receive the promised blessing that the Lord had promised to give him. He took orders from the bottom up. We wonder why it took Israel 40 years to make a 40 days journey. They took orders from the bottom up. We wonder why it is that Aaron allowed the making of and the worshiping of the golden calf. He took orders from the bottom up. Well, we wonder why Samson lost his strength. He took orders from the bottom up. And we wonder why the family of David was dysfunctional. He took orders from the bottom up. We wonder why Judas betrayed Jesus. He took orders from the bottom up. And we wonder why there are significant issues in the church. We are guilty of taking orders from the bottom up. And if we are really truthful about it, we as individuals, we have made some messes in life because we are guilty of taking orders from the bottom up. And so the disciples said, send them away. Now listen to the plausible request of the disciples. And that word plausible means having appearance of truth, credibility, and believability. Now, to substantiate and justify the orders from the bottom up, look at what happened. Look at the sarcastic thought of both Philip and Andrew. Philip's reply to Jesus was sarcastic, and Andrew's report was sarcastic. Well, according to John chapter 6 and verse 5 of this story, listen to this. The answer, and I will say that slowly, the answer asked Philip specifically, when shall we buy bread? Did y'all hear that? I said the answer asked. Now, according to John 6 and 6, we are informed that the answer did not ask Philip for the purpose of seeking information, but to prove or to test him. And brothers and sisters, Philip is being tested here, and instead of Philip referring the problem back to Jesus, guess what happens? Philip was a classic pessimistic skeptic, and Philip based everything on a sure thing, and he resorted to the earthly, the human, and the irrelevant. Now, to show us that he resorted to the earthly, the human, and the irrelevant, Philip sarcastically answered a question that Jesus didn't even answer. Jesus did not answer how much the bread would cost. He asked him where could we find? Are you with me? But in essence, he was saying meeting the needs of the people was hopeless and impossible. Now, in the meantime, Andrew had been looking around, and in his looking around, he spotted a little boy with 2 fish and 5 barley loaves of bread, which was the food of the poor. And like Philip, John records Andrew stating sarcastically and in despair, and let me just kind of say it like I think Andrew might have said it. There is a lad here with 5 barley loaves and 2 small fish. Now, take note of the fact that Andrew and Philip failed the test. And guess why they failed it? Bad arithmetic. Now, Philip's arithmetic was based upon the magnitude of the crowd, while Andrew's arithmetic was based upon the minuteness of the lad's lunch. That represents bad arithmetic because the disciples were so overawed by the magnitude and the minuteness until they completely had forgotten and overlooked the magnanimous might and the ableness of the master. Jesus was not factored in the equation. They were so spiritually blind until they saw what they saw was their own lack instead of his sufficiency. So the findings of Philip and Andrew seemed to add justification to the plausible, hopeless, faithless message of the disciples, which was, send them away. Now, as a result of them saying that, they decided really that nothing could be done. Warren Wiersbe had this to say. He said that they would have made an ideal church committee. Warren Wiersbe said a church committee is defined of a group of people who individually can do nothing and who collectively decide nothing can be done. Are y'all with me? Now, brothers and sisters, just like Jesus tested his disciples, he also tests us. And one of the designs of his testing is to detach us to the point where we stop trusting in our insufficiency and start trusting in him and him alone. Are y'all with me? Now, in the Bible numerology, in verse 37, we find the number 200. And in the Bible, in numerology, every time you see the number 200, it always represents insufficiency. And the idea is anytime we try to hope and put our trust in anything and anybody other than Jesus, it's number 200, it's insufficient. Well, brothers and sisters, let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed the one another's of the Bible? Well, can I read the one another's of the Bible? It says, love one another, edify one another, admonish one another, greet one another, comfort one another, serve one another, submit to one another, teach one another, be kind one to another, forgive one another, be kindly affectioned one to another, in honor preferring one another, forbear one another, be of the same mind one to another. We are members one of another, confess your faults one to another, receive one another, speak not evil one of another, grudge not one against another, show hospitality to one another, lie not one to another, pray for one another, be at peace with one another. Now, I read all the one another's of the Bible. Guess what? Out of all the one another's, I've never read it said, trust one another. Now, brothers and sisters, let me tell you this. When we were growing up in our home, my mother, she always told us, I don't trust nobody but me and Jesus. She told us that for years. And one day I called home and mother said, Melvin, I said, yes, mother. She said, listen, I got updated information. I said, all right, what is that? She said, well, the other day, you know, I've told y'all all your life, I don't trust nobody but me and Jesus. I said, right. She said, well, the other day I did something so stupid and I cut me out. It's just Jesus now. And brothers and sisters, that's where the Lord wants us. He wants us to trust in him. Can I read the Bible? Ye that fear the Lord, trust in him. He that trusts in the Lord, mercy shall compass him about. Commit thy way unto the Lord, trust also in him, and he shall bring it to pass. It is better to trust in God than to put confidence in man. They that trust in the Lord shall be at Mount Zion. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. We trust in the living God, trust in him at all times. Blessed is the man that trusted in him. They that know thy name will put their trust in him. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knoweth them that trust in him. In thee, O Lord, do I put my trust. So the Lord wants us to trust him. Now, again, I repeat, the disciples said, send them away. Now, brothers and sisters, I'm going to ask you, don't judge me. Please do not judge me at this point. But I've learned some from some of the young people at Mount Moriah. So I'm going to use it, and I hope I'm using it rightly. Disciples said, send them away. But Jesus had, listen, the perfect overruling clapback that is exclusively dope. Shall I say it again? Jesus had the perfect overruling clapback that is exclusively dope. And guess what Jesus said? They said, send them away. Jesus said, sit them down. Now, notice what Jesus is doing now. Jesus is inputting organizational structure. Jesus knew that in an unorganized mob, somebody would not get any food. But with organizational structure, everybody could be fed efficiently and systematically. With organizational structure, nobody would be neglected. And to have organizational structure was not an end, but a means to an end. And organizational structure was necessary for effective and successful results. Now, brothers and sisters, take note that Jesus gave the organizational structure instruction to his disciples, and the disciples in turn gave it to the people. And in giving the orders that Jesus gave, it represents orders that come from the top down. And I've discovered orders that come from the top down will clash with orders coming from the bottom up. Are y'all with me? And brothers and sisters, let me tell you something. When it comes to the church, orders ought to come from the top down and not from the bottom up. Now, why is there a reason for organizational structure? Somebody is in need and crying. And if we resort to orders from the bottom up, we're going to miss somebody who stands in need. But if we follow orders from the top down, we will make sure that we meet everybody's needs. Now look at this, and that is this. The fact that which met the needs of the vast crowd of people, guess where? It came from the hands of Jesus. Are you with me? Now understand, there is a stage is set for a miracle, and there is Jesus, and here it is. That hungry crowd, faithless, hopeless disciples, but Jesus, and a lad who was willing to give Jesus his little lunch. Now notice that Jesus looked up to heaven and blessed. Now, I got it in my notes, hashtag this. All things can be accomplished through prayer, but nothing should be accomplished before prayer. I said hashtag that. All things can be accomplished through prayer, but nothing should be done before prayer. So after Jesus prays, the Bible says he takes the loaves and the fish, and somewhere, and the best way I know how to describe it is somewhere between breaking and distributing. He got bread out of bread and fish out of fish. And the multiplication took place somewhere between the already and the not yet. Now notice that Jesus did not give the fish and bread to the people. He gave it to his disciples, and his disciples gave it to the people. Now there is a word of caution that comes to every proclaimer of the gospel. And that is this: every proclaimer, whatever you proclaim, make sure it comes from the hands of Jesus. We don't have the right nor the prerogative to insert our isms and allergies and philosophies, because that's categorized under the number 200, and that number 200 is insufficient. Oh yeah, your message might be structurally perfect and homiletically arranged and beautifully illustrated, but if it does not come from the hands of Jesus, it will not satisfy hungry souls and thirsty spirits. Are you with me? But now, folks, I got a word for you, and that is the flip side is this: the people receive that which came from the hands of Jesus through his selected servants. Too many people in the church, they want to know what it tastes like. Who is it that's doing the serving? No, that ain't what you need to know. What you need to know is what you are serving me, will it come from the hands of Jesus? And I declare unto you, if it comes from Jesus, it'll satisfy you. Are you with me? So the Bible said that what came from the hands of Jesus satisfied them. Well, let me try to hurry and close some of this. Look at the fact that the Lord always, here it is, gives more than what we need. I thought somebody would have been hollering now. He always gives more. Are you with me? The record is that everybody had eaten and was satisfied, and the disciples still took up 12 baskets full. Now what that says is the Lord always gives more than enough. God who is able. I think somebody didn't hear me to turn the mic down. I said God who is able. And the word able, the best definition I found is can do. So this able can do God is so able until he always gives some extra. Well, Timothy Keller wrote a book called The Prodigal God, and he said God is prodigal, and the term prodigal means lavish and extravagant. That makes God prodigal. God is guilty of uncalled for generosity. He is a God of superabundance. Well, I had a deacon, you didn't know him, but his name was Brother Graham. And he said some stuff in his prayer. It didn't make sense because it was such bad English. But when he died, I started examining some of the stuff that he said in his prayers. And this is one of the things that he said in his prayer. He said, Lord, I thank you for my needs and for my don't needs. And God will give you some stuff that you really don't need. Are y'all with me? Well, the story is that there was a little girl who was in Sunday school one Sunday, and the Sunday school teacher asked the question. She said, listen, who knows the difference between kindness and loving kindness? Well, a little girl raised her hand, said, oh, I know the difference between kindness and loving kindness. Said, well, what is the difference? Little girl said, well, kindness is when you ask your mother for some toast, and she gives you some toast. But loving kindness is when you ask the mother for some toast, and she gives you some toast with some jelly on it. And brothers and sisters, I tell you, God is just that kind of God. Do I have a witness? But even though God gives more than enough, he's still not a God of waste. That's why they took up 12 baskets full. But here I'm trying to tell you, brothers and sisters, God is a God of superabundance. Now, I like the way my daddy said this. Daddy said, do you not know that God always gives more than what we got? Well, my daddy said it like this. God gives more air than we can breathe. He gives more light than we can behold. He gives more water than we can drink. He gives more earth than we can inhabit. He gives more space than we can occupy. He gives more distance than we can cover. He gives more territory than we can conquer. He gives more sunshine than we can stand. He gives more heat than we can endure. He gives more soil than we can till. He gives more stars than we can count. He gives more rain and snow than the earth can absorb. He gives more sand than we can enumerate. He gives more horizon than we can envision. He gives more seed than we can sow. He gives more fruit than we can preserve. He gives more tree than we can cut. He gives more flower than we can pluck. He gives more grass than we can mow. He gives more grain than we can harvest. He gives more height than we can reach. He gives more depth than we can dig. He gives more people than we can know. He gives more love than we can imagine. He gives more mercy than we'll do. He gives more grace than we can merit. He gives more pardon than we deserve. He gives more joy than we can express. He gives more peace than we can understand. He gives more blessing than we can receive. He gives more gospel than we can hear. And he gives more salvation than we can buy. And brothers and sisters, all I'm trying to tell you is this, that the superabundance of God, his overflow plan, and his prodigality, all that tells us is that the God we serve is able. Now, I found out some witnesses in the Bible that can prove that God is able. The man of God told Amaziah that God is able to give you much more. The Hebrew boy said God is able to deliver. King Nebuchadnezzar said God is able to abase those who walk in pride. John the Baptist said God is able to raise up children from stones. Jesus said God is able to destroy both soul and body in hell. Paul says God's word is able to build you up. God is able to make you to stand. God is able to fulfill promises. God is able to make all grace abound. God is able to subdue all things unto himself. God is able to keep that which we commit unto him. The writer of the Hebrews said God is able to save to the uttermost. God is able to aid the tempted. And John said God the Son is able to break the seals and open the book that was sealed with 7 seals. James said God is able to satisfy and save and destroy. Jude said God is able to keep you from falling and to present you before the presence of his glory with exceeding joy. The Apostle Paul said God is able to do exceeding abundantly above all we can even ask or think. And I've come this morning to tell you God ain't just able, God is well able. Let me tell you how well able he is. God is so able until his holiness is able to sanctify us. His mercy is able to forgive us. His grace is able to amaze us. His forgiveness is able to pardon us. His love is able to lift us. His loving kindness is able to preserve us. His peace is able to comfort us. His joy is able to empower us. His supply is able to satisfy us. His touch is able to change us. His promise is able to assure us. His presence is able to thrill us. His water is able to refresh us. I'm trying to tell you he's able. His daily bread is able to feed us. His glory is able to inspire us. His light is able to convict us. His justification is able to acquit us. His righteousness is able to clothe us. His gospel is able to sanctify us. His sanctification is able to separate us. His glorification is able to transform us. His wealth is able to enrich us. His strength is able to sustain us. His storms are able to mature us. His truth is able to free us. His mud is able to grow us. His thorns are able to humble us. His fire is able to purify us. His discipline is able to reprove us. His parables are able to enlighten us. His miracles are able to strengthen us. His bounties are able to bless us. His voice is able to encourage us. His work is able to challenge us. His word is able to cleanse us. His statutes are able to teach us. His laws are able to guide us. His son is able to save us. His blood is able to wash us. His redemption is able to release us. His stripes are able to heal us. His spirit is able to indwell us. His eyes are able to watch over us. His hands are able to hold us. His arm is able to defend us. And his ear is able to hear us. If that ain't enough, I tell you what you do. Come with me to a hill called Calvary and see my Lord and Savior with nails in his hand and riveted in his feet and a crown of thorn in his brow. They pierced him in the side. Out of his blood came blood and water. I tell you, brothers and sisters, he died on a hill called, is there anybody here that's know he died? He died until the S-U-N said 2 suns can't shine at the same time. He did die, but that's not how the story ends. They took my Lord and took him down and placed him in a borrowed tomb. He stayed there all night Friday night. Yeah, stayed there all night Friday night and all day Saturday and all night Saturday night. But since I'm in a Baptist church, let me give you the Baptist version. Early Sunday morning, is there anybody here that can say, I'm a witness that right early, He got up early Sunday morning, said, all power I'm through. But he got all power. And I'm glad, I'm glad, I'm glad, I'm glad, I'm glad. Do you know him? I said, do you know him? Do you know him? Ain't he all right? Is there anybody here that can say, I'm a witness? The Lord